So this is recommended draft policy, reinstatement of organizations removed from the waitlist by the implementation of ARIN 2019-16. Next slide, please. This originated, it was first proposed in January of this year, moved to draft policy in March, and the AC moved it to recommended draft in September. Next, please. So it's undergone its staff and legal review and can be implemented as written. Next, please. By way of staff comments, the policy does not create any legal issues and has a minimal resource impact. Next, please. So by way of background, last year, the ARIN board suspended issuance of IPv4 through what is known as the waitlist in light of some fraud that was occurring with the resources that a few organizations were receiving from the waitlist. The board responded quite quickly once they realized that this was taking place, and suspended the waitlist at that time. And this triggered a process under the policy development process in which the advisory council could recommend an updated policy to take its place without going through the full policy process that would normally be undertaken. And that resulted in the removal of some organizations from the waitlist. Next slide, please. So the new policy that was implemented and is presently in place limits the size of block that ARIN can issue to an organization on the waitlist to a /22. It also places a limit on the total holdings of any party that's eligible for resources from the waitlist. And that limit is a /20. So an organization must hold no more than a /20 worth of resources in order to be eligible. And it also makes any block received from the waitlist ineligible for transfer until a period of 60 months has occurred. And the idea with that is to prevent flipping of resources obtained from the waitlist. All of this to say that it resulted in some organizations being removed that many of which felt that they should not have been removed because they were abiding by the policy and processes that were in place at the time that they got themselves onto the waitlist. Next slide, please. So here I just have a comparison of the old policy and the new policy that is now in place. The criteria on the left are the ones under which these organizations who were removed would have qualified under, and the criteria on the right are what exists now. And next slide, please. So the problem statement in this policy proposal is that the implementation of 2019-16 caused some organizations to be removed from the waitlist that were approved under the old policy's eligibility criteria, and that these organizations should have been able to stay on the waitlist when it was reopened to allow them to receive an allocation of V4 up to the policy's new maximum size of a /22. Next slide, please. So we were able to pull a couple of stats since the last meeting on what the change in the waitlist looked like. So at the time the new policy was adopted, 2019-16, there were 365 requests on the waitlist. So 37 of those were removed because the organization held more than a /20. So that goes to the total holdings criteria. 79 of those 365 were just adjusted down to receiving a /22. So they may have requested a larger block, but they worked with ARIN to adjust their request to coincide with the new maximum size. So they would have been notified in ARIN online, and they just made that adjustment. And then the remaining 249 were unaffected by the policy change. Next slide, please. So the remedy to the situation that's proposed by this policy is to restore some of those organizations that were removed. And so this would work as kind of temporary language in the number resource policy manual, because it would be a one-time restoration of these organizations, and it's not, you know, a piece of language that needs to stay in the NRPM for longer than it takes to, you know, just put those organizations back on the list. So it says ARIN will restore organizations that were removed from the waitlist at the adoption of 2019-16 to their previous position, if their total holdings of IPv4 address space amounts to a /18 or less, and the maximum size aggregate that a reinstated organization would qualify as a /22. So the /18 is different than what the current policy says now at the /20. So this would encompass a few of the organizations that had more total holdings than is now allowed under the current policy, but the /22 would remain the same in that that's the largest block you can request and obtain from the waitlist. And then all restored organizations would extend their 2-year approval by, and this is a variable, by the number of months between July, which is when this the present policy was implemented, and the implementation of this new policy if it passes through this community process. And then any request met through a transfer in the intervening time would be considered removed from the waiting list. And the implementation timeline would be immediate. Next slide, please. There was some lively discussion on PPML. There were 23 comments in favor, and I just copy and pasted some comments that I believe captured the spirit of sort of both sides of this conversation. So many of those who were in favor are community members who were affected directly by the changes to the waitlist. And, you know, many were also just coming out in support of those organizations and felt that this was the fair thing to do. The comments against, the spirit of those is largely that, hey, any ISP or business that made plans that hinged on getting V4 from the waitlist, you know, probably didn't have a great business plan to start with, and you shouldn't be putting your eggs in that basket. Policy changes at the movement of the community, and too bad, so sad kind of thing. So that's sort of the spirit of both sides of the discussion there. Next slide, please. So in terms of discussion today, I'd like to understand from the community, should organizations that were removed from the waitlist as a result of this policy update, should they be reinstated? So that's kind of the big question. And if you are in favor, is a /18 still the appropriate size? We talked about this a bit at the last meeting. If /18 appropriate size for total holdings, and is the /22 an still appropriate size to be administered from the waitlist? And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Paul.
Okay, well, we'll try the ever-continuing saga of improving the microphone. So I'll try something different, hopefully better. I see the microphones are now open, and I see we already have a few questions lined up. So again, either put your question in or raise your hand in the forum. So why don't we take the first from the Q&A, Beverly?
I'll remind those that are putting in Q&A to please also put your affiliation. Makes it much easier for us. First one I have is Owen DeLong, Farsight Security, ARIN AC. Am I correct in understanding that this policy would affect only 26 organizations?
Alyssa or staff, could you address that?
This is John. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Owen. All right, let's go to one more Q&A.
I have Celeste Anderson from Pacific Wave. Have any of the affected organizations already reapplied given the new requirements?
I don't know, John. Can we even address that? If we even
We'd have to go check on that. There's certainly organizations that are waiting to apply or to be reinstated by this policy. I don't know whether or not any of them have requested, but if they have, they understand if they've received an allocation since then, they don't qualify. But staff will go dig that and report back ASAP.
Yeah, if we can actually just click back to that stat slide, there's a metric on there that will help us understand that right here. Yeah, so the 79 number where it says 79 requests were adjusted to receiving a /22. So that is under the new requirements of the policy that's now in place. So those 79 were adjusted down, but the 26 organizations who this policy would affect now, they were removed because they weren't able to adjust it down to that /22 because their total holdings exceeded the eligibility criteria now. Does that make sense?
Right, unless those organizations have since released address space in some other way, there's no opportunity for them to use the current policy. And so I expect all of them are still pending because we have no way of processing them under the current policy.
Okay, let's go to our first microphone person. So let's go to Chris Tassa, please, if we can let him go.
Tassa, you have the ability to unmute.
And we'll go to Kevin next if you want to queue him up as well.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I support so first of all, Chris Tacit, Tacit Law, and ARIN AC. I support this policy. I think it's just a matter of basic fairness. I don't think it's so much an issue of what people did or didn't count on, because when you're on the wait list, you never really know if, even if you're solidly on it, if the timing is going to work out for your business plans. But I think from a community and ARIN perspective, there's a fairness issue here. You know, the reason we suspended and modified the policy was to prevent fraud, but for those who were legitimately already on the list and there was no issue of fraud being committed, I think that they ought to be reinstated for that reason. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for that. Kevin Bloomberg then.
Good morning. Well, actually now, good afternoon. So I support
still good morning in Seattle, Kevin. So
yes,
you know, that's where we are.
I support the policy as written. I believe both of the sizings listed in your questions are correct and appropriate. As I brought up at the last ARIN meeting, my only concern is the precedent that this sets. And I want to stress that because this was a unique situation of an emergency policy and some very radical changes being done, I think we can treat this policy differently. But the notion that, especially for organizations that do not have space, that are not under an RSA, because if you're under an RSA, that's a whole different thing, that policy can be either locked in time or based on what you were looking at when you originally submitted the request, rather than what is live within the NRPM. We need to be very careful about that. So I agree with the fairness aspect, but I don't agree with the notion that that the people who are supporting it because when they originally applied, it was this, and therefore they should be given it. So I hope that clarifies my part.
And Kevin, can you just give your name and affiliation? Apparently,
Bloomberg The Wire.
Kevin Bloomberg The Wire. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, I'm going to go and alternate here on some Q&As here. So I'll go with the first one. David Farmer from the University of Minnesota. I support the policy as written. I believe the /18 limit provides a balanced approach, allowing a few entities back onto the waiting list. Thank you, David. Next one, Beverly.
Next one, Owen DeLong, Farsight Security, ARIN AC. If we do this, I support the /18 and /22 limitations as a necessary of fairness.
Okay.
Next one.
I'll get that one. Chris Woodfield, Twitter, and ARIN AC. And he asked the question: is the current amount of space on the waiting list sufficient to fulfill the 26 reinstated requests? And do we have any estimate on how this will affect wait times for orgs on the list today? John, I see your hand up. John.
Yeah, there's more than sufficient space available. This will, because we still have space for cleaning up, this will result in probably a 1 month change. In other words, to the extent that this policy is recommended to the board and then adopted at implementation, our next quarterly issuance would be slightly smaller, but I don't anticipate it having a substantial impact over the long term. The amount of space involved is de minimis.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question, please.
Andrew Dell has his hand raised, but he is in a panelist mode and can't actually raise his hand.
Okay,
so if we could switch over to him, go ahead.
Well, no, it's good. Let's keep doing some Q&A because they've been waiting for a while. So let's get the Q&A.
Okay.
Please.
I don't have an affiliation. Isaac Edenbaum, how active are the affected organizations in deploying IPv6?
I don't think we'd have that data, Isaac. That's not something that we would ask. Any data would be anecdotal, but John might have some anecdotal data for you.
Yeah, just recognize that ARIN normally would not ask that of the requesters when they go to the wait list. So I don't think it's something we're able to generate.
Okay. Let's go one more Q&A and then we'll go to the hand up.
Stephen Feldman, Viacom CBS. Are there any other mechanisms in place to ensure that the reinstated applicants would be engaging in the fraud that triggered the original policy change?
I think as an overall, any application is for any resource is always has a degree of fraud. We both take reporting from the community and internal mechanisms that staff have developed. So I don't think we would treat these any different. John, Kern, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to say the original suspension was due to a egregious case of fraud that involved fraudulent companies, companies that were shell companies created solely for the purpose of applying fictitious IDs and similar. It caused us to stop and pause the policy. Our mechanisms have since improved at detecting this, but also the type of fraud that occurred that originally caused the original policy change was somewhat unique and unlikely to be replicated.
Let's go to Andrew Dull then. Andrew's name and affiliation, please.
Andrew Dull, ARIN AC, 8 Continents Networks. Observation for Alyssa. In your slides today, you asked about the question of whether you're using it as /18 as the cutoff or not. My understanding is that this is a recommended draft of this policy, and that's really not up to debate given the nature of the text freeze. Is that not your understanding, or are we still debating the /18?
Given that it is recommended, it is my understanding, but I put that question up there just to do the gut check with the community again to say like this is what the policy says. So I mean the ultimate question after this will be should we be moving forward with this policy or not?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So just from a queue management, we're not time crunched. We were actually a little ahead. But if you do want to speak or put a comment, I'd ask if you could put that, especially raise your hand soon so we can just manage that. Let's go to another Q&A. I'll go with this one. Matthew Wilder from TELUS. Not a statement for or against the policy, but rather an observation. I just want to comment that this is a case where fairness is in the eye of the beholder. Those who have been dipping into the waitlist will no doubt be bothered by the changes in policy. On the other hand, there is a matter of fairness to organizations that could get the waitlist IP addresses in the future if we adopt these changes. Thank you for that, Matthew. I see Steve Ryan has his hand raised. Steve always gets Steve, for those that don't know, is our general counsel, and I would always ask if he has something to say that we hear it quickly.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's a mistake, and I apologize that I've interrupted the meeting.
Oh, okay, but it's good to hear from you, Steve. Okay, these things happen. Okay, let's move on then to Robert Seastrom.
Rob, you can talk now.
Hi, Rob Seastrom, Capital One ARIN-AC. I have a question for John Curran, and I'm being delicate in how I word this so that counsel does not jump on my case.
Perhaps he was preemptively putting his hand up. Maybe he sensed this coming. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
The actual wording that we have here is that this is affects organizations that were on the wait list as of 2019-16's implementation. And I want to make sure that we're not going to have collateral issues involving suddenly making any organizations that were under suspicion of fraud now or in the past suddenly eligible when we thought that matter had been disposed of if we move this forward. Thank you.
You will not. There's no conflict there in that regard because you have to be in good standing to have your request process. If to the extent that we have an organization that we're dealing with any issues, they're no longer part of the normal process and would not be reinstated by anything like this.
Perfect. Appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to ask staff to read the next question, and at the end of that exchange and its response, we will be closing the queue. So please raise your hand or type your question, and then we'll deal with any of those post queues. So, ARIN staff, take it away.
Chris Whitfield, Twitter, ARIN-AC. Is it a correct statement that the additional restrictions, in particular, the move from a 12-month to 60-month hold period, will apply to these one-time distributions?
Would Alyssa or John like to address that?
To Alyssa, the current proposed text is what would apply. So we would go to the current policy in applying it. I'm not sure. I guess, Alyssa, do you want to talk about the idea of a 12 versus 60-month hold period?
Sure. Sorry. So is the question, is the hold period being changed?
The question
from
was,
the current policy?
Well, the question was, and if Chris Whitfield wants to speak, Chris has put his hand up, so why don't we open his mic? Chris, you're good to go ahead. Hello. If you get those Guinea affiliation up.
Hello, Chris Whitfield, Twitter, ARIN-AC. I just wanted to confirm that the other changes that were made as part of the emergency policy will apply to these one-time distributions. The size limit is in the proposal, but the 60-month hold period, we changed it from 12 months. Just want to confirm that these one-time distributions will be subject to that 60-month hold period instead of the original 12.
Yeah, it's my understanding that it's the intent of the policy that the 60-month would apply, and that's what staff has interpreted from the.
Right. That is correct.
Staff and legal.
This is John Swiggy. We actually apply that 60-month to anything that's been issued from the wait list.
Right.
Prior to or after the change. Unless somebody got a transfer of waitlist space in the 12-month period and it happened before that change, then it was 12 months. But anything that has not been transferred, no, it goes 60 months from the date it was actually issued on the wait list.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, seeing that all the questions have been addressed, we will now close the queue on this proposal. I thank Alyssa for her presentation. We will now entertain a poll on this as it's a recommended draft policy. So I'll ask that the poll question be put up again, asking those that are in favor or against policy 2020-2 as written. So please either vote in the poll or you can do a Q&A. I've heard some people would like to register abstentions. And the poll does not actually allow for that. But if you do not click an answer, one will not be submitted, and you're free to put that in the Q&A, and we can try and sort that. Generally, we've not called for abstentions as policy proposals, but if that's a key, please let us know. So we'll give a bit of time. We'll try the entertainment portion. I've tried not to do the humor. So John, the question has become, was the color of the beard picked to match the virtual background, or was the virtual background picked to match the beard?
Well, I didn't pick the background, so it could easily be a testament to the color of my beard. I know if that's what's been done, we're moving closer and closer to a pure white background over the years.
Yes. Okay, we'll give a few more seconds, and there's 10 seconds, and then we will close the poll and hear the results. All right, the poll being now closed, I'd ask staff to give us the results.
At the close of the poll, there were 125 people in attendance, 42 voted in favor and 14 against.
Okay, that information will be provided to the AC for their consideration.